The following program is presented by the Metropolitan Library Service Agency.
Hello, welcome to All About Kids, a program focusing on the interests of children and young people and some of the issues affecting them. Our guest today, Arlene Cardozo, is a Minnesota author and editor of the Read-Aloud Review. She'll be talking primarily about her work as a volunteer with Minnesota Radio Talking Book Network. Arlene, I'm glad we're going to have a chance to talk about some of the many activities you're involved in today. You are an author, a consultant, you're an adjunct professor at the university, but today we're going to talk a little bit about some of your volunteer activities. Most imminently, I guess, is the work you're doing for the State Services for the Blind and Physically Impaired. How did you get involved as a volunteer?
You know, this is something that I had always wanted to do, and it was one of those things that, you know, would be next year. And so just at the time I decided, okay, you know, I'm filling out my application and I want to be a volunteer there. And I went over and I auditioned and I said, do you by any chance have any children's programming? Because the things that they gave me to read were not for children. And so they brought something, the Three Billy Goats or something for me to read. And so I said that really would be my interest if I could read children.
So you wanted to volunteer to do some reading, some radio work or some audio cassettes for children who were blind or had a physical condition that precluded their reading by themselves?
Right, and that's what goes on at the State Services for the Blind and Visually Impaired. And there are two aspects, really, or two different offices out of which the work is done. One office, they tape textbooks. And of course there is, you know, paid staff which supervises and manages everything, and then the volunteers that come in and do the taping. Volunteers also come and do brailing there. But anyway, people tape textbooks, and these are textbooks custom ordered through the school system.
So an elementary school teacher who had a child who needed a textbook audibly produced, I guess, then could contact the State Services for the Blind, and a reader like you would do that.
The school counselor actually would go through the school counseling, and there would be a letter from the doctor saying, you know, that the child had a particular condition which warranted this, and then that can all be arranged, which I think is just a wonderful, exciting service.
Do you think a lot of parents are aware of this, that they can request this for their children?
I don't know. I think a lot of times parents might think that the school system would be taking care of things, and it's always good for parents to know too, so that the two can get together, because this is for blind, visually impaired, and, you know, learning disabled children. So children that are, say, dyslexic now have an opportunity, and many of them can learn just like that when they're hearing things, now have that opportunity. Children who are quadriplegic, paraplegic, who can't turn a page can, you know, have their learning that way. So that is one part of it, and that is not where I'm volunteering. I'm in the radio talking book end. I didn't even know about this other until I got there to volunteer. I did know about the radio talking book. I had known people who had volunteered there. Radio talking book is closed circuit radio, so a person has to qualify for a receiver. And again, if they would have one of those conditions, they would qualify through their doctor, or for young people through their school counselors and doctor combined. And then it's a 24-hour reading service. So most of the programming is not geared to children. Most of the programming is for adults, and yet the newspapers are read every day, so a lot of young people can hear that. The comics, which certainly, you know, there's a program for teens, and then there's my program called Once Upon a Time. So I was just very fortunate. They were just at that time needing somebody to take over the children's and to produce the children's and to read the children's.
So as a reader on Once Upon a Time, do you choose the kinds of stories and books that you want to read?
Yes, that's the thing. Well, when I came there, I said, and where are the books? And I thought, you know, I'll get to read all these stories that I had enjoyed reading to my children when they were growing up. And they said, well, you bring the books. And I said, oh. And where do I get them? Well, I don't know. The woman before just sort of had them.
They didn't say your local public library.
Right. But they said, but listen, they said this is really very important. Our mandate from the state is that this is new material. So you're not going to be reading Charlotte's Web and Betsy Tacy's and all the old favorites, because those are in the Library of Congress, which usually takes some years until those are on tape, and they can be accessed that way. So what we do is produce, you know, all brand new things. On the adult programming, there's all the bestsellers being read, for instance, and so, you know, you need to read the new things for the children. So, okay, what was I going to do? I went over to the Red Balloon Bookshop in St. Paul, and the women that run it are just so wonderful, Carol and Michelle, and they said they would be happy to lend me books to be able to read on the program. And of course, give me their advice, and all the wonderful people that work there. So they really have been my trusted advisors, and of course people in the libraries. But sometimes the Red Balloon will get the books even before
Much
the
faster,
libraries.
certainly.
Right. And so
Now, since you're reading for children at different ages, do you ever read books for very young children, books that have a lot of illustrations, and how do you describe to a child the pictures in a book, for instance, if you're reading for preschoolers?
That's an interesting question, especially since today I think there's more reliance on illustration than there was 20 years ago, certainly 40, 50 years ago. Now, do you find that? Would you agree with that, or is this?
Well, there's certainly a difference. Lush and lavish. I think the printing processes have changed dramatically over the last 20 years.
But I also think there's more reliance, because we're in such a visual society today, on the pictures to tell the story, and that a lot of times that means that the writer isn't having to do what they once did. Many writers still do. So I really try to choose those books which are less dependent on illustrations, because they tell a better story. This could be a radio program for sighted people as well, and you still don't have the book in front of you. So it's really the same thing. It's a question of what reads well. So, but I also want them to be able to have exposure to the full range. So I do try to fill in the gaps. But I've also talked to a number of people who are blind, who were born blind. Maybe some, if they became blind along the way, it's different, because then there's a recollection. If you've seen a giraffe, you can visualize a giraffe. But people who were born blind have told me, you know, you don't need to give us your descriptions, because we have our own images. Sometimes probably much more wonderful, because you're not wedded to something that you've once
seen in National Geographic or in the zoo or something.
Right. So I don't really try to describe a hippopotamus past, you know, a great big animal or something like that, as you would probably anyway to 2 and to 3-year-olds.
Well, and illustrations in many children's books are fantastic anyway. Hippopotamuses that aren't the same color as the ones that you'd see in the wild.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Do you have a regular following? Do you get letters from children who are listening to you, or from young people saying that you are their story lady, or any kind of communication between you and the listener?
I don't have as much feedback as I had thought, and the feedback that I have is more from adult listeners. So, you know, I know that there are a lot of adults, either adults who are in the house, you know, with the children, or in some case, adults who, you know, listen to Radio Talking Book and who listen to this program as one of their programs. So, you know, I'm always asking, please call up if you have a story that, you know, you'd like us to read, or have somebody type it or braille it or whatever, you know, and because I also like to read some of their things, and I have gotten some things come in.
I think that's a good example. Many adults do enjoy children's literature. It's fine writing, and hearing it read. I was interested earlier when you said you had to audition to become a volunteer. What kind of a process is that?
It's really just going into the booth, and they acquaint you with the machinery so that you know how to use that, and then just reading a variety of things. Some poetry, some fiction, some news, like, you know, from the newspapers, and just reading a variety and then sort of telling them what you prefer. It is my understanding that not everyone who auditions is asked to volunteer there, so the audition process isn't just, you know, sometimes you call it an audition, but it really isn't. I mean, this apparently really is. There are also apparently 400 to 500 volunteers, people who are reading. Some of them have regular programs like I do. Some of them have, record different books, so it's not necessarily a program that they produce. In fact, generally it isn't, but rather that someone there does the selecting and then gives them a book, and say it's an adult book, there might be 10 programs in that series.
It takes a long time to read.
And that is another part of the mandate, that you don't skip. This is a library service, so you are providing the same access as the person would have if they were reading it themselves, and therefore, if they choose to tune out their ears, that's the same as if you want to skip when you're reading, but that we don't make that arbitrary judgment for them. So so that's why the books will take that long.
People must anxiously await. How long is your program? Half hour?
Well,
hour?
no, I don't do that. No, that's with the adult books.
On your program, do you finish a book every?
My program is 58 minutes, and what I try to do, and what in working with the managers there and things, what we decided was to not let a book go over 3 times, and not let the book take up the whole show. So I will always do some other reading and then say, okay, now we're going to read the second installment of, and then give a little background, if people haven't heard that program, or to refresh them, and then to go on like that.
Well, that's better suited to children's attention spans and
yes,
kind of that.
And the children's books are generally a little shorter. We try to look at age groups from, say, about 2 till 12 or something like that. So we're not really getting into the young adult stuff. That would be the longer novels anyway.
Many of the books that are coming out now for young children are very realistic, talking about social problems. Do you choose those kinds of books to read, or do you choose primarily the funny stories, or do you choose a variety?
I really try to choose a variety because there's so much wonderful stuff available now, and I think they should have the opportunity. And quite frankly and selfishly, I love reading some of this and the learning that you do about social problems, the history, the things that you get in children's books that I don't remember at all from when I was growing up. We didn't have that range, and even at the time that my children were growing up. I think that there's just such wonderful stuff. It's hard to choose because, you've only got 58 minutes and there's so much. But of the real quality, there's always room for more.
What are some of the titles you've read most recently?
Oh, sometimes I do 10 or 12 at a time, because when you're doing the shorter picture books, sometimes there will be 10 or 12 in a program. So let's see now, I'm trying to think of some of my favorites. The King and the Cook, don't ask me the author, Mercer is her last name. I was not familiar with her, just wonderful, delightful. Stella Luna. Let's see, what else has been brand new and wonderful? Oh, Scholastic has got Vigilante, a lot of Spanish American, Latin American. It seems there's been a proliferation this spring.
Well, it's exciting, the variety that's available.
And
Children, I shouldn't have put you on the spot asking for titles, because
no,
that's what
I'm
happens
just
to me
because and it's not only hard. It's not only that, but it's hard to even decide what to. Oh, Virginia Hamilton's new book. Many Thousand Gone, Many Thousand Gone, right, the Afro-American author. Yes.
A Newbery Honor book,
yes.
I believe, for 1993.
Well,
I think you don't come to children's literature without a background. You've been passionately interested in children's literature for a long time, and in fact, even publish your very own Read-Aloud review.
That started, though, as a result of
this, after you started doing your volunteering,
the program,
because you realized that there was a lot of wonderful material available, and you didn't think that people were as much aware of it?
I think that there really is a resurgence of reading aloud again. I think for a long time there wasn't. Television was new, television has more and more, television is a convenient place, kids like television, parents are busy, everybody's working, and I think for a long time, it's not that people didn't buy and read books to their children, but I just don't think that the real story time that was kind of part of the growing up of previous generations for storytelling or story reading, I don't think in the last 20 years that has been nearly so predominant as it was before, or as it's becoming to be again. I think parents are really getting into this a lot more now. And
I think the schools with the whole language programs, and also there have been some very prominent authors, Jim Trelease and his Read-Aloud handbook, and Margaret Mary Kimmel's for Reading Out Loud, who show that research indicates that children who are read to regularly turn out to be better readers and are better prepared to learn to read when they start school, and that reading aloud should be something that's continued on into the elementary and even older.
It can be, and I think it's just a wonderful family bonding device. And actually my writing as an adult author has really been in the field of families and women, careers and families. And so I just have always felt that this is such a wonderful family bonder. So being that I have access to all these new books, I just wanted to share some of my favorites. So really that's why when you asked me, I thought, oh, what am I going to talk about first? You know,
too many.
But there are so many, yeah. So I really wanted to share my favorites, to be able to give some suggestions to people on how they might be read, so you can, you know, really get in there and enjoy doing the reading and not just feel that you were restricted to reading words on a page. But
I think you must have a sense of drama.
Well,
a little
it's
bit
fun,
of flair,
yeah, and I think that, you know, sort of to give people permission that, hey, here's where the drama is in this book, you know, you can play the king and then you can be the cook or whatever. And so I do that in the review, and also how many minutes it will take to read a book uninterruptedly. This can be some help in choosing.
Well, I think particularly for classroom teachers who want a good story and they want to know how long it's going to take them to read, because depending on the age of the children or the amount of time available every day, that certainly has something to do with the kind of titles.
Factored in, and it's not that you don't do a lot of back and forth interruptions when you're reading with and to kids, but it's the idea that with the children's books are usually 32 pages, some, you know, 32 to 48 is usually the cut, and sometimes these can take 4 or 5 minutes, 2 minutes, and other times, you know, it'll be 40 minutes. So I think that's important for parents too, you know, when they're choosing. And
the short bedtime story versus the rainy afternoon story.
Yeah,
when you want to
yeah,
finish
really.
it.
I think so.
Or the story for the car. Have you done any talking to parent groups about reading aloud and focusing on some of the techniques that you're using when you do your work with the radio program?
No, I really haven't, but it's a good idea. I would like to do that more, you know, talk to people in the community.
It's something that as a children's services librarian, when I speak to parents, it's interesting. A lot of them, particularly men, remember having been read to as children in elementary school, and it's wonderful to watch the reaction when they suddenly realize that they have the same opportunity as young parents to give their child that experience. I remember a young father who was pretty bored when I started talking about the importance of books and reading, and then I talked about, or I asked if families could remember having been read to in the school, and this young man sat bolt upright and talked about going to a country school in Kansas, and he could remember the way the classroom smelled when they all came back after the lunch recess, and what it felt like to sit down on the desk and have the teacher read aloud. And he said the only thing he can remember, I think he was talking about 6th grade, about that particular year in school was the books that the teacher read aloud. So
that's wonderful. You know, it really is.
It's exciting, and certainly something librarians promote all the time, as well as people who are from outside. Sometimes you have more of an opportunity to be missionary than we do. What about people who are interested in volunteering for something like you're doing?
They can call the State Services for the Blind. Shall I give the Twin Cities number is 642-0500.
And for anybody who might be watching, we'll put that up on the credits at the end of the program.
Okay.
Too.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful thing. There are just so many busy, involved people who are nevertheless, you know, over there every week, or however you want to do it. You know, you're taping, so you don't necessarily need to come every week. I travel frequently, and so sometimes I do 4 or 5 programs back to back, still with all the new material.
And you can tape at your convenience during the working day?
Yes, pretty much, now that they're in new location. I mean, it's still good to have a general appointment time, but you pretty much can. And also evenings, weekends, you can come in and tape. You know, it's 24 hours. There's always somebody there. There's always a broadcaster there, because there are always programs that are being done on the air. So you can always come in and tape.
It's kind of embarrassing for me as a librarian. I certainly have known about the services for the blind offered through the library in Faribault, but I'm not very aware of this kind of thing. What about legislative funding? Has there been a budget cut? Is this service being promoted?
I am not really familiar enough with the total funding to be able to speak intelligently. I know that it's under the Office of Economic Development, and then the next overlay of title is Communications Center, and then State Services for the Blind. I do know that there's a very active Friends group, and I think that the Friends group does a great deal too. So my understanding is that it is not in jeopardy as far as the state funding, but that the Friends group very much is very active and augments it a great deal. Now that's my understanding, but that is not.
Well, that's good,
chapter.
and we certainly haven't read anything or heard anything.
Yeah, but I wasn't really familiar with it either. I just sort of heard that, you know, people did this, and then when I got involved, it's very exciting, and it's fun for me to do, because I'm able then to stay current and to be able to.
Well, it's led to other things. For instance, the newsletter, and I understand you're working on a cooperative project with the Minnesota Friends of Libraries, the state association.
Minnesota Association of Library Friends has given their sponsorship to the newsletter, essentially.
So they will be promoting the newsletter in local libraries across the state.
Right, that's my understanding.
Which is exciting.
Yeah.
Again, another way of helping busy people learn more about children's literature.
Yes, I think so.
Arlene, it's been wonderful having you on All About Kids today. You've had a lot to talk about, and you've gotten me interested in getting a little bit more involved as a volunteer with some services like this.
Well, thank you very much. It's
Thank
been
you
a
very
delight
much.
to be here and to talk to you about this.
Thank you, Arlene Cardozo. Your volunteer efforts on behalf of children's books and literature and the children of Minnesota are certainly appreciated. Thanks to all of you for joining us on All About Kids. Please tune in again.
This has been a presentation of Hennepin County Library in conjunction with the Twin Cities Metropolitan Library Service Agency. We thank you for watching, and we hope you visit your public library often.